Let's get started on this. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this webinar. I'm very excited. We're kicking off this series of saving money in operations. Um, so in this series, we're going to be doing interviewing a lot of subject matter experts, bringing them on. They're going to be talking from their perspectives of what do they see are key things that we need to focus on. Today is the kickoff of this series. So I got my Director of Engineering, Chris Smithson, challenges in oil and gas. So we sat down. This is kind of our way of coming together and figuring out what are the big challenges that we see. Now, the series is going to focus on ongoing operations, all the way from conceptual design to plug-in and abandoning facilities. So we're going to be bringing on a lot of guest speakers for that. But the audience that we really wanted to key on, or anyone that could benefit from it, so that's pumper, gaugers, field technicians, field engineers, engineers in the offices, upper management. So it's kind of a wide range of information we're trying to encompass. All right, so a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A box. A lot of people haven't been on Zoom, but just put them in the Q&A. They'll be submitted anonymously. We will answer as we go when we can, and then there should be a Q&A at the end. Once we answer those questions or we'll address them, they will go live in the Q&A box. If something goes wrong, power outage, if you're working from home, a kid walks in and you got to step away for a second, don't worry about it. What we're going to do is we're going to be posting this on our blog and our YouTube channel after this, so that way you can have access to that. So without further ado, what I want to do is introduce Chris Smithson, our Director of Engineering. He got his engineering degree from the University of Houston. He has been working with Croft for the last 10 years and worked himself up to the Director of Engineering position. And then I am CEO, Cameron Croft, with Croft Production Systems. I also got my engineering degree from the University of Houston, along with my master's in project management. And then my black belt in Six Sigma, which is statistical quality control. All right, so the topics that we're really wanting to cover today is challenges and tips, our resources, what are the things that we like to utilize, and then we're going to have a Q&A at the end. We're going to try to answer questions again as we go through, but a lot of the Q&A will be at the end. Now, before we get started on challenges and tips, so we sat down trying to figure out, now there's a lot of challenges in oil and gas. You got COVID going on, so you got high supply, you got low demand, it's an election year, we got riots, we got a lot of things, but those are challenges outside of our control. So what we did is we sat down with Chris, me, and then our subject matter experts that will be guest speakers in later shows. And we started trying to figure out what are some big challenges that we're facing that we can control. And that's what we wanted to focus on today. So Chris, can you kick us off on the first challenge?
Sure. So a big challenge is knowing your numbers, and from that we mean like where your costs going, where you're spending your money, and you know what the different places that are the biggest expenses for you. I mean, LOE expenses are tracked normally on locations, and you take those numbers and maybe you send them off to corporate. Maybe they're reviewed as part of just large lump sum numbers, but really diving into the numbers of the locations and seeing how much is that one specific site costing you, how much is that one specific dehydrator costing you, or amine plant, things like that. Can if you dig in a little deeper and really take a look at what those cost areas are, it gives you a much better view of an operationally what it's costing you, and also give you really good red flags for what areas that may be something that they could have broken.
That's right.
So what like the tip for this one that we have is, you know, evaluating large expenses like a glycol loss. So if you're expending a ton of money on glycol for one specific unit, that can be a really big red flag of that you may have a leak. So you know, that's something that if you have visibility of those kind of numbers and you can see that, it can really give you a good warning ahead of time, and let you know that that's something that you should target and try to you know, mitigate that issue so that you can save some money.
Well, I like Deming is a famous statistician, but what I like his quote is, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So you can say, oh, we're losing money on that whole location, but unless you're actually tracking with data, you don't know. You're just making your best guess. So it's all about data, having the right information, But I mean, we've done a number of projects where we're sitting in the meetings and we can start tracking all of these things. And it gets to a point also on the reverse end is knowing what numbers not to track. Because what are you going to do with it? So if you track so much data, you almost get desensitized to the data in itself. So that's kind of the big thing is knowing what to track and knowing what are the high levels to track. So that's pretty well your tip is, all right, so on this, the quick tip for this one, boiling it down, there's a lot of it, but evaluating large expenses such as glycol loss.
Yeah, just taking a look for what are these bigger red flag issues that maybe you can attack first, and just get that visibility in there so you know what you're trying to solve.
Well, that came from a tip. So one of our subject matter experts, he was saying track glycol losses comes from that. He's saying it always boils down to pumps, leaks, vents. Something's going wrong if you're having large losses carry over. So, but it's a good number to track as almost a red flag later on. So yeah, I agree with that. All right, so we got challenge number 2. So vendor communication with operations. That's a big thing, but yeah, push us on that.
Yeah, so on that one, especially when times are really busy and we all got, a dozen different things to do, coordinating with your vendors to make sure that your schedule is properly aligned can be really difficult. Now is a really good time that we have a little more available time and stuff that we can take that extra effort to, reach out to your vendors if you have scheduled work for them, if your lease crew's coming out, making sure you're optimizing their time. I mean, most of us, when we have vendors, especially on a time and labor type thing, you're paying for their time to be there. When we have service crews or they go out and do maintenance outside of the routine stuff for our rental fleet, if they're billing that time and they're waiting for a compressor to start up, and you're 2 days on location while a compressor mechanic tries to figure out how to fix the thing, that's all wasted time. And being able to have that open communication with the vendor, explaining what you're trying to get accomplished with it, and maybe they can help you out with that, and really focus in on what's going to be the most efficient and optimum use of their schedule and your schedule to get the job done.
Well, and that's we had one example the other day. Our instrumentation engineer, this is 6 months ago. It's not the other day, 6 months ago. But he sat down with one of our vendors and he spent 2 hours with them, having a meeting with them. Got a lot of good information, found out controls, and we found out that this vendor had a lot more capabilities than what we thought. But he had a good meeting with them. And then at that point, it just kind of died. He had all the information, but he didn't share it with our service tech. So when they were having troubleshooting issues, failures out in the field, honestly, they should have had that information to be able to call the vendor. So we were talking with one of our partners, and it's fascinating to me. They boiled it. Oh, actually, I think that's a quick tip. Yeah, refocus comms around what the employee needs. Well, I saw what their information was. So helping out with the vendors, there's a lot of capabilities, a lot of information, but what they did is they created almost like a quick vendor directory out for their frontline employees, pumper, gaugers. And what they said is if anything goes wrong, you call this. If anything goes wrong over here, you call this person, this vendor issue. So they created a quick directory. And I thought that was a very slick way of making sure vendor communications were throughout the organization.
Yeah, and we're the vendor for a number of clients, and for us, it's knowing what they're trying to accomplish can help us better offer services for them to meet their schedule and optimize for it. If you're going in kind of blind, then you're just kind of stuck with whatever they're asking for, and you can't help or offer suggestions or anything. So keeping that communication with your vendors is really important.
Yeah. So that kind of leads us into the next one, which is cost and time required for trainings. So what do you got on that?
And this is, this was a tricky one when things were really busy. It's really hard to find time for training. A lot of us, they call it job shadowing, but it's just like go follow the guy that knows what he's doing and then try to learn best you can and hope that he's a good teacher. It's difficult to schedule it and to pull service techs out of the field and send them off to training. That's a big loss for when you're trying to run optimized routes, or taking gaugers and stuff and pulling them out of the field. They got wells to operate, and hiring people just to fill in for their time, that's a difficult thing. But now we find ourselves with a little more time and being able to maybe get some of that training, schedule that up and see what there is out there that could be potentially free training. And that goes into our tip that we have for this one, is utilizing your vendors for free training. The vendors that are out there, they're willing to help. The sales guys may be a little bored right now, so
Yeah.
they're more than happy to come and talk about, whatever gets them in the door to your building. And if it's, making them, getting training in for guys, your plunger lift vendors, your downhole pump vendors, your burner management system, all these guys, they're more than willing to help. And maybe they want to show off some of their new products and stuff too, but maybe they can show you like optimization stuff, optimization that, that guy that only ever followed that guy around,
Yeah.
learning the true way that product works, that can really help them in growing their experience and really making them a more valuable part of your organization. If your guys have the proper training and understanding of this stuff, then, your repairs are going to cost less because maybe they can fix it themselves, and they're going to be able to troubleshoot those problems faster and get production back online.
They said training is not a one-time deal. It's ongoing. No matter what, good or bad, you're still influencing and training your employees. So it needs to be ongoing. That's why they got cross-training, shadowing programs. Because what we found out is from our NCRs. So NCR is a non-conformance report. So in our organization, we do NCRs. We have project debriefs. And what we use those as learning moments. So those are like trigger events to help the stakeholders, anyone to try to understand and learn from that, and talk to employees or people that need training as a way of broadening their horizons. But yeah, utilizing your vendors right now, vendors are wanting to go out there and talk. I mean, if anything, you might get a free lunch out of the deal. So, but they're really wanting to come in and set up and do a lot of their trainings. And this is a great way of getting on. Good tip. On the fourth challenge we got is asset management. So what do we got on that?
So for when we talk about asset management, we're talking about the big fixed assets that you may have in your field, things like separators, GPUs, dehydrators, the kind of like larger asset stuff that has a long lifespan. It's not really a throwaway item.
It's that thing in the weeds, right?
Yeah, the thing that got rolled off in the trees and grew over it. And that's a big issue that people have, is that they pull out assets that weren't needed or got replaced, downsized, upsized, and then they just stick them off to the side and they never track them. Or they have an Excel sheet. It was last updated by the intern 2 years ago, and they have no idea where those things are, or what condition they're in, or if they even still exist as part of your inventory. And like knowing what that, if that stuff's idle, knowing what condition it is, so that it could be potentially reused, could be a huge cost savings for a company. If you have a separator that the internals break or something, mispad falls out of it, and you have to replace that, if you can just grab one from another location and move it over, and knowing that you readily have it, instead of your vendor has it, they got one sitting in the yard, you can buy it from them. But if you know that you have those assets, you can grab it, you can bring it over, and you can get it installed.
That's right.
And it's a big cost savings for that. And if you know the condition is, if it needs refurbishment or not, and you have an idea of what that's going to cost you. But being able to track that is tricky. And Cameron, as you know, we've gone through a number of asset programs, and the default's always Excel, but it's not always the best option for you.
No, Excel is by far the worst. As soon as you get it done, you feel good about it, and then you go do a cycle count, and it's all wrong. Everything's wrong, and then you have no confidence in it, no trust in it, and then you start losing it. Because a number of our clients save already some money this year because they found, let's just say, they found an old TG that they had. They said, can y'all fix it? They shipped it back to us. We did a refurbishment and shipped it right back out. But they saved, 75% of what they would have done if they bought a new or a used one from someone else, because they had it, they knew where it was. Now, again, it was in the trees, but they got it to us, and it really helped out. So, but optimizing the life cycle, because like a surplus energy equipment, we got 2,200 pieces of equipment on in that company right there. So it's just a lot of information to track. So I did want to say that there is the 5 biggest risk of assets. This came from one of our subject matter experts. I thought it was interesting. They said the biggest risk for assets is not knowing what you have, which you already talked about, over or under maintenance, improper operation, improper risk management. So in risk management, what they were saying is like a low pressure stuff, like tracking that it is low pressure, having a red flag on there. So that way that one guy doesn't pull a separator, throw it on there and not understand that it's high pressure. and then sub-optimize enterprise asset management system. So some of them, they said they got such great systems, SAP, the big system, well, it got so complicated, it's too hard to utilize. So what they found out, the guys actually out in the field that should be tracking it, they're not, because it's too complicated now. So those are big things on asset management that you need to watch for, but kind of goes into the big tip. So it's a lot of information, it's a lot of things to track, but the first thing on the quick tip that I think you have is, determine what idle.
Determine what is idle.
Yeah.
And then what you can use that stuff for, and what you can work with. And I mean, even if it's granular as far as like production foreman level, where they know the dozen items sprinkled across their locations, they know it, at least, they have an idea. Obviously it's better if it's, lumped together organization wide. That way, one field can pull from another if they ever need anything. But yeah, just determining, just having that quick list, at least for a reference, is beneficial.
Yeah, so this next challenge was actually pretty good, is reevaluating goals. Now, before you get started, this came from one of our subject matter experts that talked really about morale boosting, especially during this time. So that's why they really focused on reevaluating goals. But Chris, can you kick us off on that?
Yeah, the big challenge with current goals is that, our January, even into February, our goals were not what they are now. Yep. Expectations, what our salespeople thought they were going to hit, those things, it's out the window, and it's like that for everybody. So a big downside though is, when goals change, or when goals, when situations change and goals aren't reachable, it can be a huge morale killer for people.
Yeah.
If they think they can't achieve that anymore, then they're not going to try, because they know, if production targets were increased 10%, and like you have no money to spend on anything, and so one well goes down, it's like, oh well, that's out the window. Why even, we're not going to meet the goal. Like I can, I don't have to try that hard. That's a big morale killer for people.
Yeah.
And so reevaluating those goals and seeing, are they still realistic in the current time, with what you have to work with? Are they still achievable? Are you setting up, as a boss, are you setting up your people for failure? Or as an employee, are you setting up, for your boss's disappointment, because you're not going to be able to get that done?
Well, so what you're saying, it really goes back into communication. You got to be able to communicate through the organization of what is everyone agreeing on, right? So it's got to be like I do the executive coaching every quarter, and it focuses on SMART goals. We have to do it every quarter. A SMART goal is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So it has to be assessed, have to have that internal communication throughout. So that's kind of what you're saying is, pretty well everyone in the organization needs to agree on what the goal actually is.
Yeah, and opening that communication. So that's our quick tip for this one, is having that open communication with both the uppers and the lowers. So, as a boss, setting goals is one thing, but, now's a good time, instead of saying just, save me 10%, it's, save me 10%, look at our chemical cost. Where, within that, so given something that people can help to, focus and attack, is really good. And, as someone with a boss, going back to them and saying, like, hey, this was our targets, I don't know if this is achievable anymore. Just keeping that open so that they're not disappointed. You're not, setting yourself up for failure.
Right.
Both, both.
It went into an operator in Oklahoma. So during this time, I was talking with him last month, and he said, well, the uppers told us we got to cut expenses by 10% across the board. I was like, well, I can understand that. It's, COVID and all these other things going on. He goes, oh, no, but we got to maintain production. We got to maintain all of our hours. Our guys are having to work harder because they already did some layoffs and stuff like that. So it's 10% across the board, but they still want them to do everything. So he goes, it's unrealistic. So he has to talk to his 20 guys below him. And he said, all of them are angry at this. So it's just, I think that communication would have helped them, motivate them to figure out, like, we're in a crisis mode. Let's figure out what we can do, what's achievable. Let's get this thing done. So yeah, I agree with that. And then the sixth challenge is prioritizing optimization. That is a mouthful, but it's pretty well boiling down to what to focus on first, right?
Yeah, and I mean, like the first thing we had was know your numbers, because that gives you a really good idea of where you're spending your money,
Yeah.
where's your cost going, and potential red flags. So obviously prioritizing, you're like, oh, this is a huge expense. Maybe I should attack this, but this one's kind of also a big expense. But really looking at those different things and saying, what of these things is going to, like, what's the likelihood of the problem and what that problem's going to cost, and
Yeah.
is that going to fix this thing? So something simple may be causing a big problem. The example that we use this one would be glycol units. So let's say that your glycol units, you have high glycol losses. Well, maybe you just need to turn your pump down. Maybe you have a small leak. Maybe there's some foaming issues or something, and that's where all your glycol is going. And that's a fairly simple thing to troubleshoot.
Yeah.
If someone knows what they're doing, they can go in there, they can take a quick look at it, and fix that problem. But knowing what to spend your time on, what's gonna cost you the most. A generic thing like increasing production 10%. Oh yeah, that'd be great. You make 10% increase revenues, but that's a really hard thing to do. There's so much
Yeah.
involved in it, but really finding, prioritizing what's going to give you that big improvement. So something like, and this goes into the tip for this one is making sure your pumps are at the optimum speed. So for like a glycol unit, everybody goes and they turn the pump up. It's the first problem solving. Oh, you're not meeting dew point. Oh, just turn the pump up. And maybe that's your answer. Maybe it's not. Maybe it works, but you never turn it back down. And so maybe your unit's flowing
Yeah.
half of what it used to. You're still not gonna turn the pump down because everything was working fine. Why change it? But that pump running, if you can turn it down half of what it is, and that you're still meeting specification, that means you're using half the fuel gas. You're changing your filters half as often. Your pump is getting half the wear and tear on it, which means your rebuild is going to be twice as long from when you're going to need to
Hmm.
take that thing and get rebuilt. And so that's a lot of cost savings just by turning that pump down. And that this is just on a glycol unit. If you're looking at H2S scavengers, chemical pumps, stuff like that, where your rates have changed, and you don't need that injection rate, you can turn that down, save a bunch on chemical. Looking at things like that, I mean, pumps, I mean, they're if they're
Yeah.
running, they're costing your money. So that's something that it's an easy target thing. But there's lots of little things out there like that
Well,
you
so
look for
what
those
what
for.
I what I liked about that is it's knowing your numbers, pretty well figuring out what your big expenses are, and then trying to figure out. So like even in our organization, we went through all of our big expenses because we're like everyone else. COVID's killing the industry right now. It'll come back, of course, but it makes you really focus down to the nitty gritty on the expense side. So it's pretty well your cost benefit analysis. What are the big things you focus on? But it is you got to work with your guys out in the field. So like the pumps, I mean, they might see a glycol loss and just write it off as part of the, I guess, OPEX on that side. But honestly, there is a time that going out there and reevaluating something as little as a pump can cause so much um, wear and tear, and then expenses on your side that's just kind of being hidden. So you almost have to open up those numbers and then utilize those numbers for your optimization. So yeah, I agree
Definitely.
with that. Well, on the challenge number 7, so evaluation of specs. Now, a lot of our subject matter experts came on saying people need to reevaluate their specs. So, yeah, talk a little bit more about that.
So this goes into typically for us, what we're talking about with this is the evaluation of the manufacturing specifications, typically for new equipment, maybe refurbished. Um, uh, the specifications that we see from clients are varied. They're all developed, and
Yeah,
everything had a reason of why it was originally put in that spec. Either safety or strength or longevity of that equipment. But those specs, they grow and they grow for years, and sometimes you find that they're written by people that don't even work at the company anymore. They may have retired, and what you're left with is potentially cost increasing specs that
yeah,
don't really matter anymore, or you're not really sure why that thing was necessary. An example of this is we have a client that they do onshore and offshore. So for them, it was easy just to say keep the same spec. So they have 14C, which is an offshore compliant safety spec on their onshore equipment. So that
yeah,
means that equipment has pressure safety switches, level safety switches, you know, more than you'd ever put on a normal piece of equipment because it's required for offshore. But you've added all this expense for all this safety stuff that you know it's not as important onshore. You know, maybe you want a couple of
Yeah.
those things, but it's a huge added cost that you're putting on to every piece of equipment that has this to meet that specification. And you know, it's going to increase time for the vendors. As a manufacturer, you know, we have to go through all these specs. We have to, you know, make sure that we're meeting all of them. It's going to take longer lead times. You know, if we're deviating from standard, then you're going to spend more money on it with that vendor because it
Yeah.
adds unsurety to them, and they have to make sure that you know, that cost is covered on that. So
Well,
something as
and
simple as a corrosion allowance can
yeah.
add a lot of money to a project.
Well, that's what we see in like so when I got my master's in project management, they kept on enforcing over and over again of, so like if we have a 1.2 safety factor, but then we get offshore specs for onshore. You know, I think that was for West Texas that we were doing those
Yeah.
projects over there. And I mean, just the paint alone, they doubled the amount of paint that was going onto it. So it increased it. So it was like gold plating the whole thing. So this is kind of a good time to evaluate those specs. Make sure you're working with your vendors because I think one of them, what was the flanges that they were wanting us to do on it? Like they were increasing the series of the
Yeah, or
flanges
going to
too.
like ring joint flanges just because like the pressure is slightly high. I mean, it's just like things like that. They're just not necessarily standard
Yeah.
at what you're used to seeing. And
I
that
think
goes
that
into
leads to
the
a
tip
tip.
that we
Yeah.
have is, yeah, reevaluating the specs to determine what is necessary and what could be standardized. Because if you're, I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of shops, they have cookie cutter equipment. And if you can buy that, you're going to get a good price for it because they know exactly what their cost is. They know what their markup needs to be. But if you know, if your specs are pushing that into custom's going to cost money.
That's
So,
right.
you know, knowing, you know, what can be standardized, what you can pull standard from your vendors, and, you know, reevaluating that. You know, if you have the downtime, you know, look back and see what can be scratched off from some of those specifications.
Well, it kind of goes into the other tip earlier of working with your vendors because a lot of these, like let's just say you said a shop earlier. So if you go to a facility and they have the ASME code and you understand them, they can run code calcs. They can do their own systems, and then they can they will do it free of charge of giving you the recommendations of what you need or what's necessary to get what your objective is. So a lot of the work actually can be put back on the vendors to kind of help you out to figure out how to reevaluate your specs properly. So that's good. Well, and then challenge number 8, meeting environmental standards. Now, this came from one of our regulatory analysts that she'll be a speaker in our next episode, but she pushed extremely hard on that this is a challenge that she sees coming up. So, yeah, talk a little bit about that, Chris.
Yeah, and so you know, in times is the way that they are right now. If something breaks, it may or may not be a priority to fix it. So something like I read an article recently. It was talking about 1 out of 10 flares in the Permian
Mm.
is malfunctions. So either means doesn't start right, doesn't start when it's supposed to. So you know, it's an emissions problem. Fixing things like that may not seem like a priority, but eventually it will be when you know, when the helicopters start flying with the FLIR cameras again, and those guys start coming back looking for their, you know, their fine money.
Yeah,
You know, knowing, you know, trying to meet those standards, trying to maintain those standards that you're supposed to meet, that you already have the plans and whatnot in place to meet those. You know, it can be difficult right now, but you know, at the very least, tracking what is breaking, where you're out of compliance, so that you know what you're going to have to fix and what you may need to prioritize if,
that's
you know,
right.
once budgets get released and everything. Because you know, I know like the EPA is like on pause right now. They're not finding anybody or evaluating, but that will come back.
Yeah.
And when it comes back, you know, if they,
Well, even as an engineer, I mean, seeing waste streams or seeing the energy not having the potential and it just going into waste, it kills you. The efficiency kills you on it. But now she did push on that. She was speaking very heavily about don't be tempted to cut corners because either you're gonna save money now, but you're gonna pay for it later. It's gotta happen. So just don't mess with it. You know, Rhea, talk about your standards, and actually, it kind of goes into the tip that she shared with us. Is
yeah, and that's maintaining your spill prevention and control and compliance and your health, safety,
yeah,
environmental. Like spill prevention, like up in the Northeast, it's a huge thing. So like one of our clients, like anything more than a gallon of water, you're reporting it. Especially like, you know,
yeah,
we have a clients that try to put pipelines up there. They get delayed 6 months, a year, stream crossings and everything that just delay all those projects. And if, you don't want something simple like that, not doing the paperwork on a spill to come back and then now you're getting audited and you're getting shut down by, federal judges or whatever they're doing, to knock out your whole production plan just because you didn't do some paperwork.
Right.
So that, that's a dangerous thing to let lapse, because it will come back when they start looking at it again.
Well, and that, so there is, again, some vendors out there. There's some people, consulting firms, that they'll assist you with the paperwork. So it'd be terrible that you did it, you got everything, you try to do it right, but you just messed up on the paperwork side. That'd be a terrible thing to figure out. Like the HSE plans right now, especially with COVID going on, like we just happened to recently update our plan throughout our organization as well to have a pandemic. ISNet World. What was the other one besides ISNet World?
It's the other one like it, where you're not allowed on their client side if you don't have all the paperwork put in place.
Yeah, so it's we had to update that plan, and it's it's something that you need to have, you need to be putting in place, and just don't be tempted to, if you're going to be cutting expenses, this is not the area to really cut expenses on. It's very tempting, but it's not worth getting popped or someone actually getting hurt because of it. So
yeah, because there's a lot more paperwork if you get caught.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So knowing what you don't know. So that sounds backwards, but it truly is knowing your strengths and your weaknesses and your gap knowledge. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's tricky because you don't know it. So, but it is.
My wife tells me I'm fine.
Yeah, she knows exactly what I don't know. But yeah, so really it's figuring out where your deficiencies are that somebody else may be able to tell you something to increase your knowledge. And right now, when things are really busy, you're distracted, you have lots of things, phone calls constantly, emails, stuff to really keep you busy. But now's a good time to look at those areas that you do have trouble in and see what you can do to start fixing those, start improving yourself, start making yourself more marketable if you think you're going to lose your job. Things that may improve your career outlook.
Right.
And a great way to do that is just to talk to people that know. Talk to experts, finding people that that are smarter than you in things that you can learn from.
It's kind of, it goes back into like understanding your strengths and your weaknesses and kind of rounding out that team. So like we were having issues with a chemical side about 5-6 years ago on our chemical injection system, and we needed a chemical expert to come on board. So we reached out to a lot of different people. We had these 5 guys come in, start talking with us and start really educating us. But with their information, man, they gave us a huge learning curve. And then now every time we run into an issue, we can call them up and they can just, so it's like that Bubba down the street. I mean, he knows the right person to call and get it figured out. So
yeah, and it's difficult. I mean, for me growing up in the age of Google, it's you just want to Google it, and you'll spend 3 hours reading article after article, hoping you can find that answer so you don't have to make a phone call.
Well,
as an engineer, it's a little, it could be a difficult thing.
When you said network, I mean, yeah, engineers, just networking in general, engineers are highly technical people, analytical people. They tend to be a little bit more introverted. So getting them to branch out, talk to people, getting on that, it's a little rough. We've been to several conferences where it's nothing but engineers in the room, and we go to the icebreakers. It's not an icebreaker. I mean, it's, what do you do? And as soon as they mention the company, then we start talking about projects. We don't talk about each other. It's just very focused on the problem at hand. So that's kind of nice, but the icebreaker is funny. So.
Which can be good. I mean, war stories can be great. It could be great examples of, a way not to do something, a way of doing something that you never considered before. And so getting that kind of experience from, the guys that have been doing it for a lot longer is super important to make sure that, that you're getting a really good source of input and knowledge.
Well, and like webinar, we're doing a webinar right now, and the people that are on this webinar, we want to invite them to come on. If y'all need anything from us, talk to us. We want to expand your network, so we're here for you. So that kind of goes into our tip. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. That is a huge thing. Covey said that you are the average of the top 5 people you hang out with most. So in certain cases, I can't hang out with my brother that much because it lowers the average down, and I'm all about data. So, but you gotta surround yourself with people that want to push and try to learn and very strong in what they do. So it kind of goes into our research resources. So these are the resources that we utilize. Now you got the EIA, and I imagine a lot of people on this webinar joining us by the phone call. Energy.gov, SPE, API. So even a lot of these have subscriptions. Chris, you have a subscription to API, is that right?
Yeah, it's a little smart brief. It's a collection of industry emails from API and ASME. API is also a really good networking resource. They have events that they do, SPE as well. So it's a good professional organization for engineers. And they have lots of interesting articles and stuff that can keep you up to date with things.
Well, and then also on our Cross Systems blog, we got over 400 blogs that really talk about production, processing equipment, breaking down as much as we can. We try to be as informative as possible, because when we talk to people, we want them to have as much information as possible so they can make the right decision for them. But then that goes into kind of on this webinar. So we're going to be wrapping this one up. So this is kind of a kickoff. But what I did want to show is the upcoming webinars that we have. So we got Alyssa Arnold joining us in June 23rd. She's a facilities environmental engineering consultant. She does a fantastic job. Very, very intelligent. She's a PE, so I'm very excited about bringing her on and interviewing her. We got Chad Dorsett, a former production foreman. He's a plunger lift expert, so if anyone's got artificial lift out there, plunger lift, he's a great resource to talk to. Because he was a former production foreman, he does speak from a high experience on what he's doing.
Yeah, and he's a really good input for, not just the operational side, but now that he's a plunger lift guy now, it's a really good crossover. Like, he really understands well. That'll be an interesting one that I'm looking forward to hearing from him on that, because we deal with it a lot in what we do, but we're not the expert in that. So this will be an interesting one. And the same thing with Terry Nelson with WPI. I think I know glycol units well. We've built them, we've serviced them, maintained them, refurbished them and stuff, but I haven't met anybody other that knows more about them than Terry Nelson. And he's such a great resource when it comes to glycol dehydration. He gives lots of presentations throughout the year that account for PE engineering credits.
That's right.
And he's a really good technical expert, and so that's also going to be a really good one, talking about glycol units and maintenance and operations.
So he's tentatively towards the end of July so far, but those are our next 3 speakers. But if you're interested, people on this webinar, if you're going to see the YouTube channel later, if you're interested in becoming a webinar speaker, or you have something that you want to talk about, or if you know of someone that might be a good fit, please reach out to our marketer, Tori Valagura. She will get with you, situated, talk with you, and so that way we can meet and try to start building out what information you would like to share to the oil and gas industry. So please reach out to her. Now, at the end of this webinar, there's going to be a free hat and shirt if you fill out a survey. Again, it's all about feedback. It's about statistical quality control. So we do absolutely need your feedback of, what did you like about us? What are the things that we can improve on this thing? Because we want to make this tailored to share the best information and increase that learning curve to everyone out there. So fill out that survey. It will come through your email after this webinar. Now, what I like to do is keep this as a Q&A section. You can submit the questions if you have them. If you don't have them, if you need to leave this webinar and probably go to lunch, unless you're the guy from India, probably go to bed, I guess, then that would be the good time. But we're here for you if you have any questions. Let's see if there's... All right, so the one question, they put it to the chat. They have, so for the plunger lift, what is Chad Dorsett? What company is he with?
So he's with Impact.
Okay.
plungers. They're a newer company for it, so he's kind of running around doing a lot of different things with them, technical sales and that sort of thing. That's an interesting one. They have some interesting. They have a lot of the standard plunger products, but they also have a really interesting computerized plunger system that I think has a lot of potential in the industry.
Okay, so they got the AI. I know that, and
Yeah.
they're pushing on that extremely hard. So that's good. Their AI is actually it's pretty neat. It's good. Talk about data earlier. I mean, it's a lot of data.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see that kind of advancements and something as simple and dumb as a plunger lift system getting an actual computer put on it, and
Yeah,
what the potential improvements may be for that. But I mean, just from a maintenance and reliability of plunger lift system, that'll be an interesting one because he's
yeah.
got lots of good ideas about how to make that efficient.
And Alyssa Arnold, she's coming in 2 weeks, but she does a lot of consulting work for she does downhole, she does surface facility, does front end engineering design, right? And then she does like optimization work.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of the environmental things, like especially for the smaller operators, the environmental issues with something like an amine plant and all that paperwork,
Yeah,
filing all that away and everything for a full facility and getting all the requirements right can be difficult for the smaller guys. The bigger guys, they have entire departments dedicated to that. But for the smaller companies, it can be difficult to navigate all that regulatory world.
yeah. What I like about her is she almost gives them all the back end engineering, so that way these small to medium sized operators, I mean, they could utilize her as a huge resource. So, all right, well, that's the end of the questions. I don't see any more. So at that point, let's wrap up this webinar. But again, our next webinar is going to be in 2 weeks. You'll be getting a mail out. It's going to be on our social media, it's newsletters, and it's going to be Alyssa Arnold joining us in 2 weeks. So thank you all for attending. And again, fill out the surveys. Please let us know how we can better ourselves and get this thing going. All right, thank you all very much.